Well, renowned Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz spent 50 years at the prestigious university. He says he's never seen in those 50 years the anti-Semitism that we're seeing now in university campuses and arise globally. He's also a former lawyer for Donald Trump, and he has a prediction about how the cases piling up against the former president will end. And he shared that with me, along with his thoughts on leaders like Anthony Albanese and Joe Biden, when I spoke with him a bit earlier. Look, we're seeing growing international demands for a ceasefire. Is this possible with Hamas in control?
A ceasefire now would be a victory for Hamas and an invitation for them to keep their promise to do it over and over and over again. Hamas cannot emerge from October 7th with a victory. And right now, it's winning. Right now, it's winning. It's turning world opinion against Israel. It's having international institutions demand essentially a unilateral ceasefire. Look, if all the hostages are returned, I can understand a ceasefire, at least a temporary ceasefire, but the end result is to make the world safe against Hamas, because if Hamas wins in Israel, they're coming to a theater near you. We already saw it happen in Moscow. Terrorism was essentially, in the modern times, invented by the predecessors to Hamas, al-Fatah and other radical Palestinian organizations. And it's been successful, and it's spread around the world. And it came to a theater near Putin in Moscow, and it will be coming to a theater near every democracy unless Hamas is defeated.
Do you think the demands for a ceasefire and to stop the war on Hamas are analogous with stopping the war while the Nazis were on a rampage during World War II?
Well, Goebbels wrote in his diary that if Britain and France had attacked Germany in 1935 and 1936, they could have defeated Nazi Germany. It would have saved tens of millions of lives. And by allowing Germany, in violation of the Versailles Treaty, to build up its military to the point where it could conduct the Holocaust and kill millions and millions of Russians and Europeans all around Europe, you would think they would learn the lesson. You have to stop evil when it still can be stopped. You cannot allow it to grow to a point where it's impossible to stop it. The big difference between the 30s and now is that Israel exists, and therefore there will never be another Holocaust. Israel, the nation state of the Jewish people, with its military capacity, will never allow another Holocaust to occur. What we're seeing now are efforts to try to weaken Israel and try to turn the Jews back to a situation where they can be victimized, but Israel is never going to allow that to happen.
What do you say to the arguments that Hamas can't be defeated because it's an ideology?
The same thing was said about the Nazis and the fascists in Japan. And when the United States and Great Britain and Australia and the great allies destroyed the Nazi leaders, they destroyed the Nazi ideology. And although there still remain some Nazis and some fascists in Japan, essentially, the German people and the Japanese people learned that if you follow the ideology of Nazism and Japanese fascism, your life will be terrible. And if you allow yourself to be rebuilt by the Marshall Plan and by the rebuilding of Japan, your life can be better. And I think that's the message that has to be sent to the Palestinians, that if you want your life to be better, opt for some kind of a two-state solution and reject Hamas's call for the total destruction of Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. So yes, an ideology can be defeated if there is a defeat, a total defeat of the armies that support the ideology. World War II proved that.
Professor, the majority of reasonable people support a two-state solution, but does that seem difficult, if not impossible, right now with Hamas as the governing body in Gaza?
It's true. Look, the New York Times today had an op-ed by a leader of the Palestinians denying a two-state solution, saying he wanted one state. Now, that's impossible. You can't have the Jews and the Muslims of the Middle East joined together in one state any more than you could reunite Pakistan and India, there has to be a two-state solution, but it can't be created in the wake of Hamas's terrorism and brutality. It has to await some time, but the structure should be built toward the goal of a two-state solution over time.
Look, I expect you don't follow Australian politics too closely, but our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has been urging Israel to have a ceasefire. He also hasn't been standing up to the explosion in anti-Semitism that we've seen since October 7. Very little, if at all, any leadership on this issue. It's quite a similar approach that Joe Biden has taken. What do you say to these Western leaders who seem to be putting politics ahead of clear morality in defending Israel's right to exist and standing up against the anti-Semitism?
It's not even a question of morality alone. It's in the best interests of Western democracies to defeat Hamas and the ideology that stands behind Hamas. And there have been some great Australian prime ministers. I've met with some of them who have been very supportive of Israel and some who have been less supportive of Israel. The same is true of American presidents. It's in the interests of both of our countries and in the interests of all of our allies in Great Britain and Canada to stand strong with Israel and to stand strong against Hamas and against terrorism and against the attempt to build a kind of caliphate around the world. Because remember that the people who stand behind Hamas will never be satisfied simply with the destruction of Israel. They want Islam to dominate the world, and they don't want to achieve it by democratic means. They want to achieve it by terrorism. So every Western democracy is at risk. Israel is not fighting only for its own survival. It's fighting for the survival of Western democracy, of the Judeo-Christian tradition. As Elie Wiesel said once, it starts with the Jews, but it never ends with the Jews. The Jews are the canary in the mine. But if the Jews are defeated by Hamas, there will be terrible consequences for Western democracies.
Just on Trump, because you've been very vocal on the Fani Willis situation, where do you think this is now headed?
Well, I think there'll be some convictions, and I think many of the convictions will be reversed on appeal. Many of the cases against him are simply a function of trying to prevent him from running for and successfully running for president. How the voters will react to this misuse of the system is a question that none of us knows the answer to. But it's very important not to allow our justice system to be hijacked for partisan purposes and to be weaponized. I personally am not a supporter of Trump politically, but I am a supporter of constitutional rights, regardless of whose constitutional rights are being violated. And today it's the constitutional rights of Donald Trump that are being massively violated in an attempt to prevent him from becoming president.
Well, the entire justice system in the United States is politicized. Do you think the criminal and civil cases against Trump will impact his ability to become president? Will any of them see him end up in jail, or are they just distracting and leading to a loss of funding?
Well, I think it's unlikely that he will end up in prison, but it's very likely that he'll end up with some convictions, and maybe some will occur before the election. The special prosecutor prosecuting him in Washington and in Florida has said that he wants to see a conviction before the election so that people can take that into account in who they're voting for. In my mind, that constitutes some form of electoral interference. And I would like to see people decide who the next president is based on the issues that matter to them: the economy, immigration, peace in the world, the Middle East, the environment, a range of issues that are important. It shouldn't be influenced by current criminal and civil cases. Those should be resolved after the election rather than before, but they are going to be, some of them at least, decided before the election.
Professor Alan Dershowitz, I'm so grateful for your time.
Thank you very much.